Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and after basically a year of Suella Braverman really very obviously trying to position herself as the next leader of the Conservative Party, she's now dropped out of the race before it's even begun, and like the emotional toddler she is, said, yeah, I don't want to lead the party anyway. So it's another day when there's actually quite a lot of political news, but where there's political drama, there's definitely going to be a video dedicated to that. And like I said yesterday, the Tory leadership contest, that's going to throw up a lot of drama, not the least of which because there are several emotionally damaged individuals either taking part or on the fringes of the contest. And Suella Braverman is one of those now definitely on the fringes. Now, I'm not sure whether she's really dropped out or not, because I've seen no evidence she was even able to enter. In order to enter the leadership race, Tory MPs needed the backing of 10 of their colleagues, which doesn't sound like much, does it? So if Braverman couldn't even get that, then that tells you everything about how her toxic behaviour was ultimately too much, even for those who might otherwise support her politics within the parliamentary party. The Conservative Democratic Organisation, which was set up by a staunch Boris Johnson ally, they're spitting feathers. They're claiming, hey, Braverman's got loads of support amongst members, and it's Tory MPs blocking her chance of becoming leader. Now, it's not quite true what they're saying, but even if it were, that's actually a pretty good reason to block her. I mean, have they learned nothing from Labour? Popular with members can still mean toxic to voters. And if you've got a leader who actively puts off voters, you're not going to win elections, unless the alternative is somehow even worse than you are. Because there are lots of elements which go into a credible election campaign, and we don't have a presidential system, but a lot of voters do tend to vote as if we did. They factor very highly their views of the leaders on offer. But the reality is that Suella Braverman was the loosest of loose cannons. She was never cut out for leadership of anything. She behaves at all times like the rules simply don't apply to her, but she expects them to apply to everyone else. She was heavily promoted when Liz Truss took over from Boris Johnson, but immediately set to work undermining her new boss at the Tory party conference. She was sacked for literally endangering national security, then given her job back 6 days later by the next political idiot to take over. She continued to behave like a law unto herself, earning herself the moniker Leaky Sue for authorising anonymous briefings to the press in a clumsy attempt to get her way. She never accepted ministerial responsibility, and so she would have had no moral authority to demand it of others as leader of her party. You could argue the same of Kemi Badenoch as well, but Braverman's way more extreme. It was already the case before the election that she was not going to become leader. I mean, I'd said at the time, about how she'd actually made enemies of other influential figures on the far right. Now, the far right are not the majority of the Conservative Party. They're like somewhere between a quarter and a third, right? So if a far right leader cannot even unite the far right of the party, what chance have they got of uniting the party at large? She'd be too busy fighting with MPs who basically agree with her policies to win over those who think her policies are as crazy as she is. And that was before she went to Washington to deliver a speech at the National Conservatism Conference, which alienated even more of her party. Whatever hopes she had of leading her party died that day, which also speaks of her own political stupidity. If she genuinely wanted to lead her party, how on earth did she imagine she could do so by alienating as many factions as possible within that party? She was so focused on appealing to a narrow section of her base, which might be amplified amongst the party membership, often is, that she forgot that whoever leads the party has to deal on a day-to-day basis with MPs, and ultimately their position, the strength of their position, is based on what voters think of them. Polls are really important to the political power of a political leader. Because if it looks like you're on course to recover the party's reputation, then even MPs who don't agree with you will go, well, yeah, actually, you've got a chance of winning us the election, so, I'll back you. But if you don't, so she had to appeal to voters, she had to appeal to MPs because she has to work with those on a daily basis. It's important to connect with party members, but they are the least important stakeholder. So Braverman is not only not going to be party leader, she's not even going to be an also ran in the contest. Didn't even make it to the starting gate. Like I say, I don't know whether she could get the nominations or not, or she just decided her ego couldn't take being knocked out in the early stages. But it is clear she's come to the conclusion she had zero chance of winning the contest. Predictable. And equally predictable, she's now sulking. She's penned an article in the Telegraph in which the headline reads, "I've been branded mad, bad and dangerous by my own party." The most truthful part of the entire piece, which leads me to think she didn't actually write it. The article is hers, but the editors often choose the headline for things like this. But it's not just her party who've branded her mad, bad and dangerous. This is a common view amongst the public. Her appeal was so narrow that she's simply not an asset at any level to the Conservative Party. I would say her appeal is even more narrow than that of Nigel Farage. And Farage doesn't need to appeal to enough voters to form a government to get what he wants. Farage's strategy relies on only being able to take enough Conservative votes to force them into policy positions they would otherwise not take. If Braverman wanted to lead her party to an election win, she would have needed to broaden her appeal, not narrow it. Braverman just doesn't have a clue on a very fundamental level about anything, it seems. I mean, I was disparaging about Rishi Sunak as a political operator. He's like some sort of tactical genius compared to Braverman. He was at least grounded in some ways. In her article, Braverman says the reason her party lost was because they didn't keep their promises. Now, if that had been the entirety of her statement, you could go, okay, that's true. But she went on to say specifically, they promised to cut immigration and didn't, and raise taxes to a 70-year high. That's not what cost them the election. Talking about it a lot, yes, that damaged them. They shouldn't have done that. But the actual actions didn't. The only economic growth we've had in recent years has come about as a result of immigration. With cuts to immigration, we'd have suffered an even worse cost of living crisis. And with lower tax revenues, because that's what you get if your economy is not as great, the rate of tax would have had to go up even more to keep a lid on like what has already been public services cut to the bone. So what most voters want is just to have a decent standard of living, or a standard of living within their expectations at least, without the thought that politics is artificially acting as a barrier against it. Now, to this end, it is entirely possible, indeed this is what happens in this country, it's possible for people to persuade you that immigration is that artificial political barrier to your standard of living, or even high taxes in some cases. But if Braverman had won the leadership contest when Johnson stepped down, we would have seen one of two outcomes. First, Braverman would have implemented the policies that she claims the party should have, and she'd have ended up crashing and burning just like Liz Truss. Might have taken a bit longer. Maybe they'd have then chosen to switch to Liz Truss afterwards, meaning double trouble, and then that would have been the proper end of the Tory party. Although imagine just how much of a mess the country would be in after that tag team being allowed in control. Or second, she'd have come to realise that the consequences of her policies are not what she thought and watered them down herself, which would mean that some other lunatic would be writing Telegraph pieces like this about how Suella Braverman was ultimately too weak to do what was needed. Because there is no third way. There's no way of growing an economy without workers, and you cannot magic workers out of thin air. Even Labour's talk of, oh, we should train more workers for key jobs domestically, only works partially, and even then only works for the long term. Because it takes years to train a nurse or a doctor or a builder, and years more before they're experienced enough to be at full productivity for our needs. And with our economy having shrunk by about 18% in real terms since the Tories took over, the only way to get growth powering up again is getting workers from elsewhere. It's one thing for a politician to talk about wanting to reduce immigration. That is the game you have to play, given the way our media poison people's perceptions of immigration. But it is another to believe you have to follow through. Because the government that artificially cuts immigration, controlling it, managing it, absolutely. But the government that artificially cuts immigration strangles economic growth. And no matter what you convince voters about the causes of a cost of living problem, ultimately, if you do not deliver a decent standard of living, voters aren't going to go, oh, but they did all the right things. Yeah, okay, well, we'll give them a chance. It's our fault, really. No, they don't. They'll go, you're incompetent. We're going to look to the alternative. This is what happened at the election. Towards the end of the article, Braverman also showed her stupidity in another way. She said that pretending the Tories are united on the surface but being unreconciled on policy won't work. An incredibly stupid thing to think, let alone say. No party would be reconciled on policy. OK, there are some policies which are so obvious that basically everyone agrees. Not very many. Policies aim to solve a problem or produce a benefit. Even within a narrow political party, never mind a broad church party like the Conservatives, not everyone will even agree about the scale of the problem or the need for the benefit. And even those who do will disagree on the best policy to achieve it. To suggest that a party has to be reconciled on policy behind closed doors. Yes, they should publicly. Of course they should. They need to look united publicly. But behind closed doors? That is to say that the party should be made up of MPs all of the same mind. But voters are not all of the same mind. How on earth is a party with such a narrow view on every policy area supposed to appeal to the broad range of voters needed to form a government? Just on every level. You listen to what Suella Braverman has to say about politics, you think, was I being harsh in my assessment of Rishi Sunak? The answer, of course, is no, I wasn't. It's just that Sunak was clearly unsuitable for a position at the top of politics, but Braverman has an incredibly childish view of politics, completely ungrounded in reality. It's not just ego with her. She just doesn't have the capacity to understand anything political. Sunak could understand some things. It's just that he was too naive and his ego too fragile to hire advisors who would tell him he's wrong at times. But he understood there were limits in politics. It's why he pursued the Windsor Framework. He accepted that a trade war with the EU would be insane. Braverman doesn't even have that level of understanding. The question is, will she be poking at the wounds in the party that jilted her? Nadine Dorries is sticking her boot in. She's already begun. In Braverman's article, she claims she will be supporting all of the candidates and will then give her backing to the eventual winner from the backbenchers. So she's even ruling herself out of accepting a shadow cabinet position under that winner, probably because she does not expect to be offered such a role, no matter who wins. But it's equally clear from this article, she will not be backing the winner, no matter what she says. After all, there are a range of directions the party can take, and much of it will depend on who wins. Nobody believes that the Conservative Party under Tom Tugendhat will behave quite like one led by Priti Patel. And yet Braverman has set out what the party must do to win power. She's very clear on that and it's very narrow. Is she seriously saying that if the next leader doesn't adopt the policies she insists are essential, that she's going to disown her own article and enthusiastically back the policies of the party leader, which are clearly against her own? If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. Now, Braverman is sulking, and she will sulk for a long time. Maybe she's got ambitions to sit things out for a bit, wait for the new leader to fail, then present herself again afterwards. Maybe she'll realise that being seen as a rabble-rouser is not the best way to do that, but I'm not sure she's shown much sign of learning lessons. So I think it's probably a case of she will be a pain on the backbenchers, encouraged by the Conservative Democratic Organisation and some commentators on Conservative Home, until she ends up shitting the bed so badly maybe she gets the whip withdrawn. Then maybe she goes to Reform UK, who knows? Because someone who wouldn't even do as she was told when she was made the joint third most senior member of the government is not really going to behave as a backbencher, are they? The major element of speculation as far as Braverman is concerned is, will she go into hibernation for the leadership contest, or will she carry on shouting from the sidelines? And if the latter, will she publicly say who she backs, or does her ego not allow her to back anyone that isn't her? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.